Oh, hello again, and welcome to the second part of our little history lesson on Henry VIII. This part is a bit longer because we're going to talk about Henry VIII and his six wives. Now, before we start counting, though, we need to say something about Henry. And remember that Henry had two fundamental lessons he learned from his father, Henry VII: divine right and absolute power. Now, divine right means a king holds the crown because it is God's will. For the same reason, the crown must pass to the king's male heir. Therefore, it is imperative that the king must have a son, a successor. The crown is put on the king's head by the bishop in a cathedral. It is the will of God, and to keep God happy, you must keep on passing the crown to your male children. Absolute power. A king will not let others decide for him or allow others to share his power. Although he might avail himself of counselors, ministers, all decisions, all responsibility are his and his alone. In other words, you don't say no to the king. And also, we must talk about his brother's wedding. This is Arthur, Henry's older brother, and Catherine of Aragon. They were married. And why Arthur? Well, their father, Henry VII, had named his heir Arthur because he needed to justify his indirect succession to the English throne. Remember that Henry VIII was not directly a Lancaster, he was not a York, he was a Tudor. And if you know anything about English legend, then you know that Arthur is a powerful name. Things didn't go as planned, though, when Arthur died, only 5 months after his wedding. Nobody really knows how Arthur died. The doctors of the time speak about a sweating sickness. Anyway, at this point, Henry VII had to arrange a new wedding between Catherine and now his second son, Henry, because he had to maintain a good relationship with Spain. But Henry was not too happy about this, possibly because it wasn't clear if those 5 months, in those 5 months, Arthur and Catherine had consummated the marriage. It wasn't clear if Arthur had visited Catherine in her bedroom, and so initially Henry refused. But when his father died in 1409, Henry changed his mind and consented to get married with Catherine. He said, it was my father's dying wish. That was possibly one reason they got married. Remember, he was 17. She was 6 years older. She was 23 years old. He was 17. She was his older brother's wife initially. But he consented also because, well, Spain was a very rich ally. She was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. And Spain was rich and powerful. Spain was in the middle of its El Siglo de Oro, and it was receiving tons of gold and riches from the Americas. Remember that. And so, this is Catherine of Aragon. And they tried many times to produce an heir and had 6 children, but only one survived. Henry only had one living child with Catherine, and it was a girl, Mary Tudor. And so it was imperative for Henry to have a male successor. And he asked Clement VII, the Pope of Rome, to annul his marriage. Annul means declare it never happened. There are only two conditions you can meet to have your marriage annulled. One condition is it was not consensual. If you were obliged, if you were forced to get married, then you can annul the marriage. Henry and Catherine were not obliged to get married. It was a consensual marriage, so this condition was not met. The second possible condition is that it was never consummated, but Henry and Catherine had 6 children, a living daughter, so it was not possible to annul the marriage, and the Pope simply said no. There were multiple factors that influenced Henry's final decision. What was the final decision? I'll tell you in a minute. Factor number one, Divine right, you know this. He needed a successor, and Catherine could not give him a boy. She was too old. Number two, absolute power. Not even the Pope says no to the king. Are you kidding me? And fact number three, one very persuasive young lady. This one. Originally one of Henry's mistresses, a concubine. Her name was Anne Boleyn. Catherine tried everything to save her marriage, but in the end, Henry divorced from her. How? Well, this was his decision. He had made up his mind, and with these words, published in the Act of Supremacy, he changed forever the course of history and broke away from the Catholic Church of Rome. Be it enacted by authority of this present Parliament that the King, our sovereign Lord, his heirs and successors, kings of this realm, shall be taken, accepted, and reputed the only supreme head on earth of the Church of England, called Anglicana Ecclesia. This was a huge thing. This was a break. This was a schism. Compared to this, guys, Brexit is a joke. And so Henry VIII married Anne Boleyn on the 25th of January 1533. It was a very promising wedding. Yes, especially Anne Boleyn's promise, I will give you a healthy boy. And, in fact, Anne Boleyn was probably already pregnant on her wedding day. And on the 7th of September of the same year, another girl was born. They called her, like Henry's mom, Elizabeth. This king is not happy. Fearing the king's anger and the risk of being replaced by a new queen, Anne chose a desperate solution and asked her brother to help her conceive a baby boy. Oh wait, fact warning. There are many reports at the time, and even a poem which describe the queen's promiscuous actions, meaning she invited men to her bedroom. But remember, there were many that hated her at court, so we have no actual proof that she was guilty. We have no actual proof of adultery. So the correct way to say this is that she was accused, tried, and condemned for adultery and incest. Oh, well, adultery committed against a king has another name. It's called treason, and the punishment is death. And you know what happened next. It was May 19th, 1536, when she was decapitated. And on the 30th of May, 1536, that's only 11 days after Anne Boleyn's death, Henry got married again to this girl. The new queen's name was Jane Seymour. She was not at the same social level as Anne Boleyn, but she was, well, Henry liked her. And so even Jane Seymour promised to give Henry a healthy male successor, and on October the 12th, 1537, she kept her promise, and this is Edward, finally a boy. Sadly, Edward lost his mother only 9 days after his birth because Jane Seymour died of postnatal complications, probably hemorrhaging and infection. Dying of childbirth was a common thing in the 16th century. And so now, the problem of succession was solved, but Henry had another problem of a diplomatic nature, because diplomatically England was now alone. No allies, it was isolated. It happens if you and your country become heretic. The rest of Europe, the rest of the important part of Europe, was Catholic, and England was not. And so, now Henry needed political support. And his chief minister, Cromwell, strongly recommended that he marry a princess from a moderately Protestant country, such as Germany, to reinforce the political situation against Catholic countries like France and Spain. Henry was not very enthusiastic. He waited nearly 3 years after Jane's death. In the end, he consented to marry a princess from a place called Cleves, but first he sent a painter, Hans Holbein the Younger. He wanted to see her. He wanted to see what her face was like. So Hans had a simple job: meet the princess, paint her portrait, and bring it back to England. And this is what he painted. Well, she looks nice. She looks very nice. And in fact, Henry VIII was in love again. He consented to the marriage and arranged for Anne to come to England immediately. And when she arrived, he saw this. And in his mind, he thought this: I like her not. If you had been there, you would probably have heard a furious Henry complaining to Cromwell about Anne. But the marriage was part of a diplomatic pact, you see, and cancelling it would compromise the political alliance. So on January 6th, 1640, Henry VIII married Anne. My Flanders mare, he called her. Mare means horse. Obviously, he never showed up in her bedroom, and the marriage was never consummated. And it was annulled on July the 9th of the same year. Anne was granted a generous allowance of money, a palace, and the title of Friend of the Crown, or Beloved Sister of the King. Yes, it was the first official friend zone. In 1540, Henry was getting old. He was only 49, yes, but his physical condition was declining quickly. His unhealthy diet was also a factor. And if you've seen part 1, you know what I mean. But still, he needed company, so he got married again. Catherine Howard married in 1540, but she had other lovers and was condemned to death for treason the following year, 1641. And again, he got married with Catherine Parr in 1543. At this point, the king could barely move. His articulations hurt. He could not stand on his 2 feet. They carried him around in his chair. She was more of a carer than a wife, like a nurse in a hospital. And she remained queen until 1547, when the king died. Yes, Catherine Parr was the final queen consort of the House of Tudor. During his 38-year reign, Henry VIII expanded the navy and fitted the ships with cannons. His break with the Catholic Church meant he confiscated the property of the Church. But his general administration of the English economy was not good, though, because he spent too much money to maintain his court. And this means he was not the greatest Tudor monarch. The greatest Tudor monarch was only 14 at the time of Henry's death, and we'll talk about this in our next little video lesson. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and bye-bye.